All right. I've never thought about how to start this. Should we say hi?
Yeah. Okay, wait.
Okay.
Yeah, we can just say, like, you want to say, like, oh yeah, we can. I didn't have to roll.
So this video, Maya and I took the Ocean or Big Five personality test as a way to introduce ourselves and as a way for us to discuss some things about ourselves. The interesting about this iteration of the test is that in parallel with you answering questions to reveal your own scores about yourself, you also have the opportunity to also answer the questions about another person, so your perception of that person and how they rank on the questions that you're ranking yourselves on. So it's an interesting way to be able to compare yourself and how others perceive you and how you perceive yourself. So enjoy the video.
All right. We have to confess. We want the results, but we just forgot to hit record. So we have to redo this because we are very disorganized, unlike our scores.
It's so funny. I gave both of us really high conscientiousness scores, which includes being careful. Yeah, I'm also not going to lie. We also did this for another video we recorded today. So
We're rusty. We've been out of it. My results are on the right-hand side. So the red dot on the right-hand side is how I scored myself, and the blue dot on the right-hand side is how I scored Maya. And then Maya's result is on the left-hand side, where her red dot represents how she scored herself, and the blue dot represents how she scored me. All right, so the first of the Ocean is open-mindedness. So Maya scored me surprisingly higher to me, and I think this was a lot because I'm currently reading a lot for a potential rotation project, and every time the question asked about novelty or creativity and ideas, I'm thinking back to how I literally have no ideas for this rotation project, even though it's a really interesting problem that's being presented to me, and I just have no idea that I feel is somehow creative or novel to approach it with. And so I think this is a specific mindset I found myself in while answering these questions, and can explain why I scored myself so low. But in general, I think the goal of a PhD, and this is what I was saying on the interview trail, is to learn how to identify interesting problems, ask interesting questions about them, and then answer those questions with interesting methodologies and approaches. And so I'm really hopeful to be picking up those skills during my PhD training.
yeah, no, I agree with that. And I also feel it's interesting because I feel creativity in some sense, a creative idea, for example, is something that's usually defined ultimately in retrospect. When you see something ends up working and then it ends up being a huge discovery, then you're wow, what a creative way to approach for example, immunotherapy and cancer. I think that's really creative. But then if you think about it, there's a lot of scientific ideas that are also probably creative but ultimately didn't work. So it's kind of a tough thing where it's hard to assign ourselves as being creative. So, but I think that definitely in terms of just generating a bunch of ideas and being willing to test it, which is a lot of science, most scientists I think have that mindset. So it's good to know that there's definitely things within our control about being creative.
Definitely. And so with conscientiousness, I find myself somewhat of a disorganized person, so that's why I think I scored myself as lowly as I did. But I think that we are harder on ourselves than we might deserve, I guess.
Yeah. No, I feel I see this a lot where I was an RA in college, and a lot of my residents would come to me and be I'm super disorganized, but then also I knew they were taking 5 classes and we're doing 3 clubs, and we're doing a lot of things that are actually taking a lot of organization. So I feel it's definitely really easy to judge ourselves and be we're not organized, and with anything, and that's really normal. And then on the flip side, you can see I gave myself as someone as being pretty well organized, and Kenneth did that too. And I think that's because I am definitely can be someone where organization goes too far. I'm someone who lives and dies by my to-do list and my calendar, which is good during school and stuff, but it can kind of make me not as flexible as I would want to be in terms of just things that are outside of academics or outside of the stuff that I sat down and decided to do each day. So I think a balance is always something that's hard to achieve, but that we're both working towards.
All right, extroversion. Yeah, I feel like introvert, extrovert for me is always so context dependent. And so I think that when I'm social or with friends, I can easily put on an extroverted appearance or personality. And so I think that naturally people would rate me, understandably, more extrovert than how maybe I view myself. And I always I've been reading a lot of heterochromatin paper recently related to that rotation project I mentioned previously. And so I find it actually a really good analogy between heterochromatin and euchromatin, and extroversion and introversion, very context dependent, a very shifty definition over the years, but somehow people tend to agree in general what it means. But so yeah, just interesting parallels.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. I feel like I feel like a lot of people, like if someone views themselves as introverted, like other people, well, actually that's not true. I guess that's the exact opposite of what I was gonna say. I was gonna say that I feel like people are usually right in calling someone an introvert, but often wrong in calling someone an extrovert. And I think that's just because like we conflate extrovertness with like being social, which like I think most people are with like people they're like comfortable with and like friends and stuff. But ultimately, it can be like different ways of recharging your energy, even if you love being around people. I'll say.
Well, we agree that we're all very agreeable, so I guess there's really nothing more to say on that. So, negative emotionality. I think this comes back to that we view ourselves more negatively than we probably deserve to be viewed. I think we're just our biggest critics, and I think that that's kind of reflected in how we ranked each other here as well.
Yeah, I agree. But I think we're both working towards just like I think one thing that this made me think about just like for MD PhD, I always hear like a lot of and just for PhD, I hear a lot of horror stories about how like PhD is like the most stressful experience of people's lives and everything. And I just I think that there's so many things that need to be changed on like a systemic level so that like that's not the case. But I also just think like personally for me, like I could definitely see myself as someone who would make PhD more stressful than it needs to be just by like me becoming anxious about things. Like I definitely want to think about how I can avoid being like high strung or like insecure and like experiencing imposter syndrome in MD PhD while also acknowledging that like part of it is like kind of inevitable and natural and like not being overly judgmental or like assigning like negative labels to those emotions, even though we often view like there's this like thing about like people who are like super high strung and like they're like annoying or like gunners or whatever, and I think it's like a lot more complicated than that often with like feeling anxious about like academics or school or anything.
No, totally agree.
I think me and Kenneth, like we both put a lot of pressure on, not pressure maybe, but we both have high expectations for ourselves. But like at the same time, like I think we both really want to help other people, and that's why we're doing this channel. And I hope that like is something that stays really constant because like I really do think like these career paths are like really about ultimately, moving society forward and not just ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what we really want to do is like decouple like high aspirations with competitiveness, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to have great achievers and people strive to be great, but we don't want it to come at the expense of our health by creating competitive environments that are detrimental to our well-being.
Yeah, really big agree on that. So I guess like also to like anyone who might be listening to this and just thinking about school, like pre-med I think has a reputation of being like full of super competitive people where it's like very sink or swim. Like you often hear about like weed out classes or like you need to get X MCAT score and Y GPA and things are graded on a curve or whatever. But I think like ultimately like there is no progress if it just comes at the expense of leaving everyone else behind in the dust, because like at the end of the day, like with the exception of maybe like a few rare individuals, like for most of us, like the mark we make won't probably just be like something we discovered. It'll probably just be the relationships that we like sowed over the years. So I think like if you can keep that in mind during pre-med or like other competitive things, it makes things a lot easier. And like it definitely helped me a lot when I felt like really sucked into this like competitive space that I hated in my first few years of college.
Yeah. And it's because it's so easy to compare ourselves to others. It's so like just out there to do. yeah, it's just easy to fall into that trap of comparing yourself to others and counting all the ways you don't measure up relative to other successful people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it. Just like, that's it, period.
No, I mean, like, as you can see from this, like, we are a lot harder on ourselves than we are on others. So, like, when you compare yourself with others, it's not even, like, a fair comparison because, like, you compare, like, this, like, external view of a person that you have to, like, kind of, like, the difficulties you know that you face because, like, we all do face, like, difficulties we don't talk about or, like, I mean, none of us probably goes around and talks about how difficult, like, a certain class was or research is. And, like, even if we do, I just don't think it's at the same level that we might feel it. So it's really hard to, like, make fair comparisons with people. And I think it's just easier to stop trying to make comparisons than trying to figure out how to make them fair.
Sounds good. Should we continue to compare ourselves then by taking another quiz?
Yeah, okay. So we were thinking next we could take a quiz about which bender we are from Avatar: The Last Airbender.